Awesome. Well, it's very nice to meet you. Thank you so much for being here.
Sorry, I have cold hands.
That's okay. Yeah, it's chilly outside. So we were chatting a little bit before we have just started, and you were asking me why I've done this. I did my bachelor's of psychology at the university here at the University of Saskatchewan, and I had a couple professors that were just so much fun to be around and me in their class that as I was coming towards my graduation, I thought that I didn't really want to stop getting that experience. I wasn't sure that I wanted to stay in school, and I didn't. I didn't want to pursue anything postgraduate, but I knew that I liked this environment, and I wanted to listen to people and bounce ideas off of people and chat and just have these conversations. And I was listening to podcasts a lot. It was like all I did whenever I was driving, had any idle time. I was just listening to people have conversations instead of like music or TV or movies. And it just randomly, I thought, well, why don't I do that? If I'm enjoying it so much, why don't I get involved in it personally? And it's been it's probably the most fun thing I do on top of like anything like sports wise, exercise. I get so excited when I have a podcast booked and I get the opportunity to talk to like someone like yourself. Yeah. It's exciting
and unique. And that's what really intrigued me about when you first reached out about this, is that oftentimes people who are doing all those podcasts that you listen to are doing it for not the wrong reasons sometimes, but it's not the passion. It's not always the passion that drives them.
Yeah.
It is, creating a presence or monetizing what they're doing or whatever. So I thought it was really neat because because I'm so darn old and been around for so long. I didn't know you. I hadn't heard of you. And most people who are interested in promoting, teaching and the love of teaching and learning have gone past my radar in some form or another, or I've reached out to them. So I think it's really fascinating. And what it does is it makes what we're talking about way more accessible, because you're coming to it not as someone who is, researching and studying and promoting a book or anything like that. You're like, I just had a great time with some cool people and I want to continue to do that. And so I think that sends a really good message to people who are listening, is that your motivations are, I want to say pure, but not, that's maybe a hokey word, but I think it just makes this stuff accessible.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important, because people have lots of misconceptions about what's going on, and there are lots of factors that influence people's understanding of teaching and learning, and maybe some people, their only experience has been K-12, or it's been an undergrad, and they don't see all of this exciting stuff that's going on. And you today are sitting across the table from a lifelong learner, so I'm committed to the cause. I am interested in continuing my education, even though some people will be like, are you done yet? And every time I'm done something, I'm like, well, I'm never done. I got to add something else to it. So that makes me excited about your passion and your interest in this area. So that's why I asked you the first question before we got started today. So thanks for indulging me.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for being here. And yeah, I completely agree with everything you said. I think that's a big deal, and not to my own horn or inflate my ego, but I think that helps with something like this, is that I am doing it because I want to do it, and not because we were talking about whether I had advertisers earlier. It's not a money thing. Right? It's just getting into it, and that's a big deal, I think, because people can sense that. And people that have asked me about the podcast that aren't guests have asked why I'm doing it a lot, like friends and family too. And my answer a lot of the time, honestly, is that it's just an excuse to get people like you in the room with me, because it's a lot different if I'm not posting it and I say, would you just get coffee with me and hang out? And I didn't ask anybody that way, but I think people would be more reluctant, right? Because it's just, you're busy, you have stuff to do, you have courses to teach and research that you're doing. Whereas this is an opportunity to actually spread some awareness about the topics that we're talking about.
Well, and there are formal avenues to do that in like you say, in the research and giving sessions to our colleagues and whatnot. But this adds another element for people to have a less formal way of sharing. And I'm sure everyone you've asked has been like, oh yeah, right? They haven't hesitated for a moment, because those are the people who are truly interested in what's going on. And I will try not to use the word passionate or passion more than 15 times during an interview, but I think that that's what drives a lot of folks. And sometimes they get into it because they were really interested in a subject area, and then they connect to teaching and learning, and they're like, wow, nobody told me about this. I had no idea this was going to be so good. I get to work with energetic, bright students every year, and I get to help them tackle problems. They get to help me tackle my problems, and so it's not a surprise that people would want to come here and lift the lid on it, or pull back the curtain, or whatever metaphor you want to use to talk about teaching. And I'm I love the area, the discipline. It's central to my identity and everything that I do. And as I'm a rambler, so just like if you have a stop sign somewhere, but I'm working with lots of people who have been in different professions, and they're all preparing to retire, and my age or a little bit older, and they're like, so when are you retiring? I'm like, I haven't even thought of it. Hasn't even crossed my mind. Like, why would I want to get away from something? And what would I do? Sit at home and go through my scrapbook of all the students I worked with, and I wish I could do that again. So it's something that when you're in it, you can find your sweet spot. You just want to stay connected to it for a long time. Yeah,
that's great. And again, I think the only answer to those questions is the one you gave. Why would I stop? I'm enjoying doing it. So. Did you always enjoy doing it, like right from the beginning, super young age? Did you just know that I want to teach other people, or?
I don't know. I think I've had some really good role models in my life. Teachers that I worked with. My mother, for example, who saw value in creating positive relationships with people, and teaching allows you to create positive relationships with people. But I wanted to become a school teacher so that I could coach football, because I loved coaching high school football. I wanted to get my head shaved for fundraising. That was like, okay, those are two cool things, and I'll just have fun with students. And so, I did go into education in the beginning, and it was not what I thought it was going to be. And so I actually switched my career. I did a year in the College of Education after an arts degree, and went to Calgary. Took a break from school, so I went to school in Calgary. That was my taking a break. And then had some other jobs, but I always found that I was, even when I was going to school in Calgary, I was being hired to help teach some of the classes there and be a TA and things like that. And so I think it was just a matter of time that I came back to it, and working in the area in a support role and at the university, and it just allowed me to then teach my first class, and then one thing led to another, and then I did finish my education degree, so I did come back and do that. I was a substitute teacher in the inner city of Saskatoon, which was great. Learned a lot, but it took me a couple of tries to really get hooked, but once I did, it's been something I've been doing. This is the first winter that I haven't had a class since 1997, I think, on campus. So it's been a while.
Yeah, that's quite the battery.
Yeah.
Is that by choice this time, or just taking kind of a break to do something else, or?
Well, the university has a deal where if you're a senior leader, so I'm currently the principal of the USask campus in Prince Albert,
right,
that they don't want you teaching because it will take up all of the time that you're supposed to be doing other things, or you can do it, but they won't pay you, and you're not allowed to do it on your own and stuff like that. Because when I was in the interim vice provost role, I did manage to sneak in one class, but basically did it gratis, and worked with a amazing colleague who is actually now an instructor in our department, and the two of us managed to pull it off. But it was a situation where it was a cohort at Cumberland College, so it was a large, impactful group that we're bringing through and doing a master's, and I had worked on the contract and everything like that. So I wanted to teach one class in that cohort because I'd worked so hard to do it, so they let me. But in this current role that I'm in, I've been relieved of my teaching duties temporarily, at least while I'm in this role.
Yeah.
So it's I still have lots of contact with the students in Prince Albert. I still have graduate students, but my name is not on any syllabus this year for the first time. So is it a choice? If I was given the opportunity, I'm sure I'd be teaching at least one grad class, one night a week kind of thing. It'd be lots of fun, and I could still fit it into my schedule. But it makes me, it gives me time to reflect, and then I will miss it lots, and then I'll go back to it again with a renewed passion when I've done my other admin roles.
Yeah, it'd be like having some good food after you've been starving for a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what is it being the principal now of Prince Albert look like? Like, how is it?
Well, it's been a really interesting opportunity, and again, more learning, more connection to higher education. When I was in the interim vice provost role, Prince Albert, the campus had just opened in 2020, so it was fairly new. We had programming there for a while, and they brought it together. Bought a building, renovated it. It's beautiful. You have to come visit. It's just amazing. And then there wasn't really a super clear plan as to how to run it. So there were a few people who were like in Saskatoon that were overseeing what was going on. And when I was in the vice provost role, I tried to give it as much attention as I could, but it was one of the many things that I did. And then when I went back to being a faculty member, and then they created this position, I applied for it, interviewed for it, and was successful. And so it gives me an opportunity to really focus on bridging for the needs of that campus. It is, it's not a regional college, it's a full-on campus. So we have over 550 full-time students there and a bunch of programs. And I get a chance to advocate for them, take a look at the way that the finances are, the way the HR structure is, do some strategic planning, bring it fully into the community in Prince Albert. So I get to meet lots of folks, and everything is dreaming big and dreaming towards the future. And so far everybody's, playing nicely with me, which is good. I'm pretty easygoing and easy to get along with. So it's been good to advocate, and the people there who have worked in Prince Albert for the University of Saskatchewan for many years are just wonderful people, and they do things above and beyond when you have a smaller organization. So I'm just trying to keep out of people's way, help when I can. But I have a really good student advisory group, for example, and I meet with them once a month, and they're able to bring me into contact with issues and concerns that they have. So that's kind of my class this year, is that small group of students.
Yeah, I see. Yeah.
that I leech energy off of. But it's an advocacy role. It's a strategic planning role. It's a chance to apply what I know from different roles I've had on campus to help people. My door's open. People can come in and ask me questions, or they're like, hey, we never had someone here before. Is this your job? Do you do this for us? And I'm like, yeah, I don't know what it is, but I always say yes. And then we figure out later if it,
go from there.
Yeah, we need a parking lot. Okay, let's see if we can find a parking lot. We need, another water filler station. Okay, well, let's get on that, because we need to, make sure the students' needs are taken care of. Or we'd like to have a bowling night. Do you want to pay for our bowling night so that we can get students together and do some community building and those types of things? Yeah,
that sounds really fun. It seems like it's kind of the other side of the coin from what you've been doing a lot, where you're at this higher level now, making sure the trajectory is on course. Mm-hmm. Do you enjoy that more, do you think, or do you like being kind of involved in like the more, I guess, like day-to-day activities of a class?
Well, usually you're teaching, depending on the semester, sometimes 3 classes, sometimes 2, sometimes 4. So that really can consume you and become a central focus to what you're doing. You also have to manage all the other faculty type things like your research and service work and committee work. And as you move up the ranks, you get more opportunities to take on those roles.
That's a good way to put it.
Hey, can you help me? I need a last minute, because you've done it before. Sometimes it's easier for you to integrate into those things. But I used to think all I wanted to do was be in the classroom and have an impact on those, number of courses I would teach each term. But as you accumulate that understanding, then I found that I can make an even bigger difference in admin roles. It's different. Like we were at the Murray Invitational basketball tournament last night, and the youngest girl in our house in grade 12 is playing in that. So I go in, and of course I see so many wonderful teachers who are now coaching and working in the schools and are making a commitment to improving the lives of their students. I think, hey, that's cool that I've worked with those people, and they all come up and talk to me, and just lucky enough to build relationships with them. So you get to see the impact of being in the classroom and the people that you've worked with, and they've gone on to be leaders and make positive contributions. So that's the part that, I feel bad for all my kids, because they're like, oh, who's your teacher this year? Like through high school, they're all like former students and whatnot. Whereas in an admin role, you don't always see, you create a framework so that other people can build those relationships and make the learner successful. Right. So you don't have the same, daily contact with people who are going out in their profession. So I'm slowly weaning myself off knowing most of the high school or elementary teachers in Saskatoon, because I'm not teaching them directly. I used to work with all the shop teachers, the practical applied arts teachers. So I could go into most schools and would know who the home ec teacher was and the IA teacher, because I worked with them in a number of classes that I would take, and just a really good opportunity. And then as they move through and become administrators and superintendents and those kinds of things, that would be a different connection. But yeah, that's slowly starting to go away, and depending on how I end my career, maybe I'll be back to that, and I'll forge relationships with a whole new generation of people who will be in the classroom.
Yeah. Well.
Long answer to a short question. Sorry.
No, it's perfect. I like the long answers.
Yeah.
That is cool though, because you kind of get to, even though you interact with less and less with those people one-on-one, it's almost like maybe it is literally that your impact is growing, right? Because when you're higher up that way, you can spread down the things that you want to see happen down the chain.
Yeah. And I've had amazing mentors, so I don't claim to have gotten anywhere in life on my own. And so I've had people who have said, it's okay. Like, I know you want to just teach as many classes as possible, but maybe if you did this, it wouldn't be such a bad thing. So I haven't stumbled upon that on my own. People have helped me, find that path, and have reassured me that it's okay to do those jobs. And ultimately, that when I was focused on being a middle years classroom teacher, I would have worked with a lot of students and had an impact. And people said, well, but when you're working with teachers, you multiply that. And now that and it took me a while again to become comfortable with that thought. But again, it's people who see the bigger picture when you can't. And now as I see the bigger picture, I think, I'm able to give that advice and guidance to other people. I never thought I would be in a position to do that. I think it's really funny that I am a principal, because I spent a lot of time in the principal's office when I was a student. And so I think there's probably a number of former principals across the province, those that are still with us, thinking, oh my gosh, I think I had a permanent chair in some of the principal's offices. Not because I was necessarily, I wasn't a bad student, I was a good student, but I was just like very active in maybe unproductive ways.
I see. Yeah, kind of disturbing the class a little bit. Yeah. I definitely have some of those stories myself too. I think it's almost weirder when somebody doesn't have at least like a couple of those stories. Like you just like sat quietly every year of school and you just listen. Like I think it's difficult for most kids. So it makes total sense that people go into the principal's office sometimes, and it's cool too. Like it sounds like you've had this really broad experience of education at all sorts of different levels, and I'm sure that helps, even having been in the principal's office as much as you say you were. I'm sure it helps you to understand like what students are going through, what the teachers are going through that you're trying to teach, the people who now you're in an administration position of trying to help them out. It probably, I would imagine it's easier to kind of look at them and go, okay, this problem is not necessarily something that they're just freaking out about. It's something they need help with, and you're experienced in a way that allows you to provide that help better.
Yeah, and just getting to know people helps you understand people. And for me, every interaction that I have with someone, like our interaction today, I'm going to take something away. I'm going to learn about you. I'm going to think about this and my bike rides or my skis or my paddles or whatever, and I'll reflect on that experience, and that will help me with understanding, you, human nature, this situation. And I think if we can be reflective and put all those reflections together, then we have a better way of working with people. Like I don't, I'm no genius, but I really feel that empathy and relationship building has got me a long way in this profession. And I think, those students who unfortunately that you refer to go through school and just sit quietly in their desks the whole time, I think in some ways educators have maybe failed them because you want to draw out what makes kids special and what's unique, and they're not all going to be athletes or actors or musicians, but there's something in every student that is amazing, and we have to value that. And I think that's the same way in university. It's the same way in an admin position. How do you facilitate an environment so that everybody gets the opportunity to shine and be the best them? And the best of them might be different than the best somebody else, but they need to feel really good about who they are. And sometimes we're missing that, or people go through their experience and no one nurtures them or challenges them, because sometimes people need a challenge as well, not just to be coddled or whatever. And that's a missed opportunity, I think. Like for the campus in Prince Albert, what I really want to do is allow students to have as rich of an experience as possible. And if we don't set up the campus that way, where we can have interactions and collisions, positive collisions outside of just taking a class, then I think that we're not giving them the full university experience. So that's one of the things that's on my radar, is to try to do something different. So people don't just drive downtown, get out of their vehicle, go into a class, come back out, hope they don't get a parking ticket, and then go back home. That's not really the university experience in my mind.
No, I completely agree with you. There's a lot more to be offered, and it's good. I like the term positive collisions too, because like you said, not every student reacts the same way or has the same interest, but people also react like wildly different to different types of conflicts, and also I guess like collaborations would maybe be the other type of word. And like for me personally, most of the time when I change my mind, it's not somebody like it's not during like a quiet, polite conversation where somebody just introduces a new idea to me, unless I'm listening to something or reading something. But most of the time when somebody changes my mind personally on something, when I'm sitting one-on-one with somebody, it's usually a bit of a contentious conversation. There's a bit of an argument going on, and I don't know why, but for me personally, that opens me up a little bit more. I'm like, okay, this person's pretty passionate about this, and I obviously disagree, and this is getting a little bit heated. But then I think about it afterwards, and people have changed my mind that way. Whereas other people, that just doesn't work at all. They need a conversation that's very nurturing and positive and warm and subtle. But it's super difficult when you're asking, especially a teacher that's actually like teaching a class, and especially of kids. You've got like 30 some odd kids. How do you attend to all of their needs, right? So
yeah, and to not think that you have the answers for every learner either, and that being humble as an educator, I think is really, really important, because there's a lot of super smart teachers out there, but they sometimes forget about being humble and being receptive, and that they're not just simply there to pontificate and spew forth knowledge, but they're there to inspire and spark that interest. So yeah, you have the right answer and the right answer. That means nothing for you to just give that answer in the end when someone has struggled. Right? Let's give them the opportunity to try, fail, learn, try again, maybe move 1 millimeter forward, but that's growth. And as opposed to, okay, no one has clearly been able to figure this out, I will now show you the solution on the board, and then we'll move forward. And who's, and then students are just like, okay, if we just never have the answer, then they're just always going to show us the answer, and we don't have to learn and struggle and actually grow. And so that's something that humbleness to say, okay, let's work on this together. I'm going to get down on the, when you go to a kindergarten class, if you walk around and you stand up the whole time, you're never going to learn about a kindergarten class. If you go to a kindergarten class and you sit on those little chairs, or you get on the mat on the floor and you lean over and see those kids doing what they're doing, that's when you start to understand how they learn, and that's how you can actually connect with them. But if you come in as this, Goodyear blimp and you fly around the room, right? What does a Goodyear blimp show you? A stadium with a whole bunch of dots, which are people, and a little green strip in the middle, which is a football field, but you don't see anything about the game, right?
That's a really good way
you have to get low. Find out that kid is eating that cinnamon, whatever. I want to say flavored. I guess it's flavored Play-Doh. That's one of my favorite. My favorite kindergarten stories is I had an intern in a kindergarten classroom, and they were so, they were busy, and it was red week. In kindergarten, you pick one thing and everybody focuses on it. So I was in the back observing, and they had made red Play-Doh with like cinnamon, and it smelled great or whatever. And the teacher was like so focused on one of the students over there that there was one little girl, and she's sitting on the floor, and she was just like eating it, like just pounding it down. And I just thought, that's so cute. And I guess it's safe, like it was homemade Play-Doh and stuff like that.
Yeah,
right.
Right.
You gotta be aware and get into their space to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, totally. Otherwise, you miss that stuff. You're exactly right. Yeah. One, two. When you were talking about like you just give the answers to people too, you're completely not only are you not teaching them, but you're underutilizing them as well. And it sounds like you're trying to do a really good job of this in your current position. Whereas, like when you're leading people or teaching people, if they get even 100% of you and what you know, that's only 100% of you. Whereas even if you extract only 80% of everybody else's capability, it compounds way more than just what you could provide, right? And then you're able to pass that on through them. And so,
yeah, because what happens if you give the answer and then you go away, right? Now what? I don't know what to do, right? There's no one here to help me. I'm helpless, please. And building capacity in people in whatever they do, be it their job or as a student or is I think a really important part of being in any of those positions that I've held is that capacity building. And again, people have allowed me to fail and supported my failure. So I haven't hit the pavement too hard too many times, but hitting the pavement every now and then is okay if it's just a scrape or a scuff or even a broken bone's heal, right? But it's I'm really trying to just create an environment for people to be the best selves.
You talked about having mentors and that being a big part of your ability to do what you're doing. And do you have like anything in specific that stands out from any one mentoring session or a lesson that you heard repeatedly from different mentors?
Good question. I think a lot of the mentorship that I've had was, I've had lots of people that I trust, that I could sit down with and have like deep conversations about what's going on. And I have that, like this week, a colleague of mine in Ontario, wonderful human being, and we just get together and talk about, teaching. We talk about learning, and we talk about, building community and those kinds of things. So some of it's intentional, but there's also been a lot of mentorship and we, are lucky to experience this in our lives where we don't even recognize it. Like people are moving things out of our way, right?
Yeah.
Unbeknownst to us. And that is a form of mentorship because we can, creep along at our 1 mile an hour. And if we were going that speed and we came up to those barriers, there's no way we could get over, around, through, under, whatever. We would just just tap off it and bounce back and we'd be done. But we can creep along because those barriers have been moved out of our way, and we can, there's a path to success eventually, and we get more and more momentum because we don't have the, Newton's laws come into play. There's not as much friction and there's not as much equal or opposite reaction happening or force. So so I've had a lot of, opportunities that have been made for me. Because people are like, I think he's going to be all right in the end. He may not be there right now, but that's something that you don't recognize at the time. And as you go back and look at it, go, okay, why did that happen? Oh, that's why that happened.
Yeah.
Remind me to hug that person next time I see them, or thank them for what's allowed me to be successful. And, The other thing, and it's not lost on me, is that the amount of privilege that I have in my life is remarkable, right? Overeducated white male, North America, all of those things. So though, I never think that I am, I have conquered all and this is all of me and stuff like that, because there's so many hidden examples of privilege that move me forward ahead of other people. So they're the intentional ones that people would have moved out of the way for anyone. But I also understand really clearly the privilege that I have in my position, and try to never think that I'm great Jay. I've done all this on my own, because I've worked really hard to connect with other people in the community, and I see where privilege has never entered into people's lives even for one day. And to think that we have somehow, it's that prairie mentality where we've conquered nature and everything is great. Like, that's so false. And so some people go through their lives assuming that they are superstars, where they've just, what's the phrase, whatever, they're not starting on, trying to get to first base. They're starting at third or halfway home, right? Yeah. And they just kind of make it to home plate. So that's another thing that drives me and makes me really focused on trying to help other people, is because of the privilege that I bring to everything that I do. Like, I don't get followed in a store. I don't get pulled over for no reason whatsoever. I can go anywhere in Saskatoon or even in other countries where I've traveled around the world, and I have a bubble wrap that not everybody gets. So that has really helped me to grow and to reach where I'm at, and just to be aware that it's not all my hard work and dedication, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's really good, even just for not only to understand it, but for your own personal mental health too. Like, I find that just reminding myself of that sometimes, like, there's been like instances where I get upset with somebody and I literally have to like stop and relax and be like, listen, like, I don't know anything about that person's life, and they're upset about something today and I'm not. So odds are my life is going a little bit better than theirs right now. And that could be for any million of reasons, right? And as you were talking, a couple quotes popped into my head, and the first was either Charlie Munger or Warren Buffett, and one of them said that they had won the ovarian lottery. So he's talking about that. He said, "This is not. I don't have all of this money and this investment success just because I just willpowered my way into it over anybody else." He said, for me to be born in this country under these circumstances with these opportunities is like 80% of the journey. I paraphrase that a little bit, of course. Yeah. But and then the other one was Arnold Schwarzenegger. I heard one time giving a speech, and he said, "I'm not a self-made man." That it's like the people that helped me get into the U.S., the people that helped me when I was here, the people that have shown me different paths, and my mentors, and the people that I've looked up to. It's all of that combined with your ability to capitalize on the opportunities that you're given, right? And like you said, some people are just not one single opportunity falls before them, and we have to remember that.
And oftentimes it's the opposite. It's barriers. It's not just that they don't have opportunities, but there are things that are purposefully in their way. And so it's, and I don't claim to be, a savior, because that's another path that people go down. It's like, oh, well, if I, this notion of white saviorism and all those things, like, that's not what we're trying to do here. But, start with awareness, like you say. Start with, why that person cut me off when I'm driving here is because if they lose this job, if they're late one more time because they had to take their grandkids to daycare on the other side of the city because there's nothing in their neighborhood, then they're going to lose that. Then they're not going to have housing security. Like, all of those things, as much as it's difficult to think about those, that's, you should be, processing the world in that manner. I just finished reading a book the other day, and so I love to read. I'm glad that you have this pile of books here, and lots of them I have read or are at least familiar with. And it was 21 Things You Don't Know About the Indian Act. And I don't know if you've read that by Bob Joseph. And it's making that kind of information accessible to people who are not familiar with it. And, reconciliation is a significant part of what I'm trying to do. Don't claim that I'm there yet, but trying to contribute in a positive way. So I read that book, and some of it I was familiar with because I do have I'm a graduate of the history department at the University of Saskatchewan as well. So I studied back in the day Western Canadian history, where everything was about settlers were great and we tamed the land and everything like that. So it's funny because I read that book very differently now.
No doubt.
But I also had was gifted a book by my son about folk tales and prairie stories about settlers, and I started reading it after I read the 21 Things You Should Know About the Indian Act, and it was just, they have a blurb at the beginning that talks about, we're talking about these are now, this is Alberta was formerly this, and now it's treaty this, and Saskatchewan and Manitoba, but it's just really hard to read that story of perseverance and stick-to-itiveness of all these European and Eastern Canadian and American and people coming to Canada and taking land that wasn't theirs, and trying to feel any sense of pride in all that they accomplished, because at the same time the Canadian government was dismantling a culture so that they could have a place to farm and all those things that were happening. And they came here and they didn't know how to look after animals, right? So why were they here in the first place?
Yeah.
So I'm really conflicted by, and I've been talking about this in my house. It's like, I've read this book, I can't really enjoy the other book, and I think a lot of people need to feel that discomfort to have a true understanding of what's going on.
Yeah.
I don't know how we got on this path. I'm sorry, I'm taking us down a tangent, but these are things that influence me as an educator and as a leader. Yeah.
Well, it's exactly important to talk about for that reason too, right? These are conversations that are going to come up, and so yeah, don't feel bad about it. I like going wherever, but I had a thought one time too, as you were saying that, it reminded me of this, and it was the idea that we like to think now that we're so high and mighty, and not even necessarily like the perseverance and tenacity kind of things that you were talking about from that book, but just we have this idea that like society's great now, and it's all good, and we're really moral now. But I had this idea that the only reason things are set up the way, particularly in North America and in Canada and the US, are set up the way they are now, is by being built on mounds of blood and mud, essentially. And it doesn't, I don't know what the answers are going forward, and that doesn't necessarily mean that like you need to burn the whole system down or something crazy like a lot of people like to say also. But it is something that we need to be aware of, right? It's just to take that into account, that there's a lot of sacrifices that some people made willingly and a lot of people made unwillingly for us to be where we are, and it's important. So.
Yeah, and we need to have discussions around it, and we need to have understanding on all sides of a discussion. Like I like to refer to myself as Gray J. It's not because of my temples or anything like that, but that notion of the world isn't black and white, and the more time we spend understanding it, because it's easy to say that's right, that's wrong, that's high, that's low, that's what, to have opposites, and then it's easy to understand the world. But when you get into that complex gray area where some days it's right and in some contexts it's wrong, and those things, I think that's where we really have our deepest discussions and the ability to grow and understand by connecting with people. But it's too hard to do that way. It doesn't sell newspapers. It doesn't put money in people's pockets. So it's better to say, I'm right, you're wrong, you're stupid, I'm smart. And there was a time where in many areas, especially politically, where you could be on one side or the other, but you still understood the common good and would work towards that, and you could have a conversation. You'd be like, okay, I understand where you're coming from. I don't necessarily agree, or it's not my party's policy to agree, but it's in the best interests of the people that we serve collectively. Let's figure it out together.
Yeah.
And that seems to be missing. And I think that culturally we have that as well. Like, you are so different than me. We're all humans, right? Like, there's a lowest common denominator that connects us all together. And so let's build on that common strength, and then, that's one way that we can solve things together. But that notion of having to, you're either on one side or the other is so wrong. And what it does is it becomes so inflexible that people can't grow and they can't see other perspectives, and they just identify themselves as being this and only this. And so as someone who's grown up as a lifelong Toronto Maple Leaf fan, I'm now playing on the Montreal Canadiens team here in Saskatoon. And so I've had to open my mind, and not to make light of what I said prior to that, but there's a really lame example of, squabbling with people because they cheer for one team and I cheer for another. And, and when it comes down to it, I'm just happy to be still playing hockey and enjoying spending time with friends and teammates, and regardless of the jersey I have on. But sometimes our unwillingness to be understanding and our unwillingness to be open to other people's opinions really negatively impacts our ability to do anything. Right? I know we're supposed to be talking about teaching, but
I think it's still on the topic.
Okay, good.
In teaching, well, and I'm learning lots about you too, which is also why I wanted you here. So, what you think? But I heard somebody listening to, or I was listening to somebody, and they were talking about why somebody was asking them why all Christians don't get along. For example, he's like, why even inside of Christianity, like, don't people get along? And his point was that there's like a few major things and there's a bunch of minor things, and everybody argues about the minor things and they forget to focus on the major things. And I think that happens in everything, like even hockey, like you said, but like politics, society, laws, municipal politics. We forget about the majors, and then we want to argue about the minors and try and not even necessarily solve things that way. I think sometimes I fall prey to this, is that you just kind of get excited to argue with people about them. Like, you're like, I want to show them that I'm right. But if I've been noticing this a lot recently, I had like a couple conversations even this week where I'd be talking about topics about justice with people in my life and in groups that I'm in. And people would say things that for me, it would be like so backwards from the way I would look at something. And then I would have to pause and remind myself that the major point here is that we all want people's lives to be better. We want society to be better. I don't need to start flipping tables over this minor thing here. At the end of the day, we both want the same thing. We might disagree on the path a little bit, but that doesn't mean that they're wrong and I'm right, or I'm wrong and they're right. And I think we forget that a lot, especially now.
Yeah, and just looking after the big things. That's a Stephen Covey, right? Is, you look after the big things, and all those tiny things will, don't waste your time on them. They'll figure it out, right? The boulders are the ones you want to worry about, and the pebbles, whatever. The pebbles will always fit in the box, so don't worry about that. And I think we kind of lose track of those. We can all get there. We all have different ways of getting there, and most of the time we're intended on the same final goal, but people want to have their own spin. They want to be recognized for being the person who has the great idea or the motivator and whatnot. And I think that often steers people away from, like you say, into arguments about the insignificance, because it's just about personal and how they're viewed outside of the people that know them. And
it takes away from the most important things. When speaking, even it's going to be a bit of a segue, so not to like switch the gears super hard, but even if you look at like the narrative of your own life, you said that you were interested in education, and then you it wasn't what you expected, and you moved away from it, and you come back, and you're still on the major path. And so if destiny was something you believed in, you could say that it's still that path towards the destiny of being an educator is followed to, with minor things that have moved that aside time to time, but you're still on that major path. And the segue inside of that is that it seemed like you were saying before we started, you talked about owning a broadcast company for a bit. Yeah. Was that a segue away from the education, or was that involved in it at the same time? Or?
Yeah, I guess I was doing that at the same time, but that was career planning is not a straight line.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah.
And mine is very much a goat path, because I always say yes. It's like improv or theater sports. If the The root of that is if somebody hands you something, you do yes and yes but whatever, and then you move it along. So you always accept the gift. So if you're on stage with someone and you're doing something in a skit and then they go completely in another direction, you can't say, well, that's not what we planned. We have to stop now because there's an audience and it's live and whatever is going on. Kind of like what we're doing here today. So you take that and you go with it. And so that's always been the way that I've kind of done my career planning. And you know, I was in school, like you said, in education, and just wasn't a fit. I think I was like 20 or 21. I was starting my second degree and I was like, what am I doing? And just needed a break. So I ended up going to Mount Royal when it was Mount Royal College. It's now Mount Royal University, and took their broadcasting program. And then came back, finished my education degree. But when I came back, I had learned, you know, production. I'd worked briefly one summer at CJWW on the radio as a sports person, like the weekend guy, and that was kind of fun, but realized it didn't pay very well. Tickets and t-shirts. So if anyone's listening, you want to get into the broadcasting industry, you get to go to lots of concerts and monster trucks for free, and you get lots of free t-shirts, but the pay wasn't super fantastic. But again, learned a lot there. Had an opportunity to put some of the skills that I had learned in school into practice, but started a production company doing, you know, short videos, promotional videos for people, instructional stuff, and, you know, did work with the Saskatchewan Teachers Federation, used to do some of their TV spots, did some spots with community living, as it was called back then, in terms of promoting inclusivity and support for people with intellectual disabilities. And yeah, it was just a really great opportunity to create something that taught or informed or opened up ideas about what was important to other people. And I had the capacity to facilitate that just based on a technical understanding, but also really enjoyed hearing stories and learning from people and finding out about, you know, one of the first big ones we did was a piece on a boy with autism who was integrated into a classroom in the Catholic system here, elementary school classroom. And it was really kind of unique at the time, but it was really interesting to follow that Roger around for a while and made a connection with him. And he was, you know, not super verbal and not connecting with others, but because of through the camera lens, you know, he actually said my name one day, and it was just people like, wow, what's going on? And so that was really cool. All under the pretense of creating informational videos, so to advocate for people who are maybe being shut out of traditional classrooms, giving them the opportunity to do that. And so those things have you know, contributed to my career work, and at the same time, you know, working at the university and helping other people. When you teach, you get exposed to so many new ideas and so many other areas of content that you wouldn't normally. So it's been part of that accumulation over time that helped me, and I really enjoyed it. I was at one time like that was maybe the career path that I was going to take, but I decided to, you know, I made a conscious effort to steer myself towards teaching instead. And you know, I still have a lot of my gear, but I have no time to go out and, you know, set up a shoot, and it's getting a little dusty, but I still, you know, if somebody needs something edited, I still have, you know, Final Cut, and I can blast something together, and you know, my kids have gone into that as well, so that's influenced them, and you know, they were making stop motion claymation when they were little kids, cool. And those kinds of things, and I was able to provide them with gear and help them along the way, and also teaching those types of classes. So I was actually teaching production classes for many years on campus, and gave people the opportunity to find their creative selves in a way that they hadn't before, and that was very satisfying for me. And still have some of those, you know, people will stop me on the streets like, remember that video I made in your class? That was so much fun. And some of them were very, you know, they were excellent productions, and people, you know, rented out halls and did performances and got all their friends to be actors in them, and it was really, yeah.
This sounds super fun.
Yeah.
Well, content creation is so, like, it's, even when it's just presentations or educational, even like just like making a a TED Talk video, for example, it's really an artistic endeavor, because it's not just that you're trying to convey information. You're trying to convey it in a way that keeps people attentive to it. Are they going to enjoy the video? And like simple things like, I'm sure everybody's noticed this, that if you're watching a video where it's just one angle on somebody the whole time, it's not as interesting as if it even just changes a little bit here and there. And you're still getting the same information, but the presentation is kind of this artistic endeavor that the producers are going through to keep you captivated, I guess.
Yeah. You can really, I mean, there's techniques, all kinds of techniques that you can employ, and some of them are, time honored and expected by your audience because they're used to seeing that everywhere else. So, you start with a wide shot, go to a medium, a close up, back to your medium, back to your, and then end on a wide shot. And people don't realize that, but that's, that happens all the time.
Yeah.
And then you have some, Quentin Tarantino who does it completely differently, or somebody like that breaks the mold, but does it in a way that is jarring in a positive manner, and then suddenly you're introduced to a whole new way of seeing things. And one of the other questions I had for you at the beginning of this was, do you edit this? And you're like, no, we just let it run. And I really like that. And I talk about the difference between producing something that is engaging and interesting and has its warts, so to speak, as opposed to trying to create something that's so polished and slick that it doesn't have any kind of connection to what's going on.
Yeah.
And so we would talk about Wildcat video. That's one of my buddies, Rick Schweer. That's one of his terms. And what it means is you record something as it happens, and I spill my coffee, whatever, we don't edit that out, or I swear or something like that would be like, oh my gosh, we can't have that in there. But what that means is that people remember it. So while you're teaching them, that the humanness is still a part of it, that reality is still a part of that, as opposed to making something so polished that because you don't have a $1 billion Hollywood budget, you're never going to get to that level of polish. So you might as well stick with the rough stuff, and then it's memorable. And then it's like, oh yeah, Jay, like, remember he had to wipe his nose halfway through it's something as dumb as that makes it memorable and makes it more real, more authentic for people. So I'm glad that you just hit record, and then we go through this, because I think what it will do is help your audience come into contact with the ideas you're trying to share in a much more meaningful way.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think a big part of that too is, and you'd be able to speak to this better than I would, but when you're making any type of content, it seems like it's better to just make what you would want to see. And for this, I wouldn't want to see it edited. I don't like watching podcasts when it's chopped up or in segments, or they have all these breaks for ads in the middle and spread out. As the production value
Stitcher.
Yeah,
sorry.
Exactly. Yeah, and it just comes out of nowhere.
Yeah.
It's jarring.
Yeah.
And so I noticed that as the production value or quality goes up in something, I just tend to enjoy it less. I want to see it just rough, like you were talking about.
Yeah.
So
that was a bad Stitcher sound bite, though. So I was trying to make that sound that they put on the end, but that's not good.
Yeah, or the watermarks and stuff.
Yeah.
But exactly, stuff like that is going to be left in, because we're not going to pretend that we're not going to pretend that we're not human beings, right? That we're just content. That's what this is about.
And that's the message that I have for educators. There's no one educator mold model that we're trying to be. And yeah, maybe you had a great teacher when you were in school, but you can take bits and pieces of what you learned and what you liked and what you didn't like, but you're going to be something completely different. And that notion of when I work with teachers who are about to go on an internship or whatever, and they're like, oh, I wish I did this better or that did better. I'm like, you know what? Because you are you're going to connect with students that no one else is going to connect with. And that's going to mean that they're going to have an experience that is different. And maybe you're not even their teacher. Maybe you're teaching another class or you're teaching in a subject area and you never actually see them, but they get to have a connection to you and a relationship, and you listen, and that quilt that is a staff, all those squares are different material. Sometimes they're different sizes, sometimes they're old, new, whatever, but they come together and they create that blanket for a student. And you might be the square that touches that student the most, or you might be the one on the far end that really never has a whole lot to do with it. But if you didn't have that variety and that uniqueness of yourself, then the student's experience isn't going to be, you don't want a bunch of robots that are all the same in a school, because then, oh my gosh, like how would you ever find success as an individual if you didn't connect with those robots? If you weren't going to be another robot, we'd graduate 5% of the students every year. But because we have people who are, different from different cultures and different genders and they bring different passions and interests. Oh, passion, drink, no. To what's going on, then students can find those connections. So you're not going to love all of your teachers, and I tell people that not all your students are going to love you. Sorry. And that's one that I always struggled with, because I wanted to be everybody's favorite teacher, everybody's friend. It's like, you know what, there's just going to be some students you don't get along with. So do your job, and then the ones that really need you will find you. And I think a lot of times that's a stress that people who are going to be teachers, or even people who are teachers now, is they feel that they have to be a certain way and not themselves. And it took me a number of years teaching at university to realize that I could just be myself, and that was good enough. And what a amazing feeling, just released me from all kinds of, it had to be this way and it's going to be okay. And I can remember running into students. I had one student in particular, and every student I've worked with is unique and a genius. This particular one was already an engineer, and then I think she went back and then became a doctor or something like that. And she was like dipping through education or way other things. I ran into her at Home Depot one day. We were looking for trees or something like that, and had a nice chat and everything. And one of the best compliments that was ever paid to me, she's like, "You are exactly the same as you are in the classroom. You are just like, that's not an act. It's exactly who you are as we are standing here talking at Home Depot." And I thought, cool. Because that was something that took me a long time to get to that point and to feel comfortable doing that. And so that's, if I can speed up that transition for the people that I work with, be it faculty members. So when I was a department head, I was mentoring new faculty members, for example, I just tell them, be yourself, because if you try to be something different, it's going to be a lot of work. It's not going to feel good. And when push comes to shove, whoever you are comes out. So when you're in a panic situation, you can be, all prim and proper, but the real you is going to come out. Or the joke, if you're trying to be the joker, but you're not really a joker, then, when things happen, you'll retreat into maybe a more of an introvert, like those things. And that's okay, because the students that you work with are going to be a mix of jokers and introverts and everything in between. So I try to put that on the table as soon as possible, and then some people get it, some people don't. At least when I'm connected to them, and hopefully down the road they will.
It's hard to, like, even just putting a mic in front of your face. It's weirdly difficult to act like normal. But it takes a little bit of warming up, and it's not as easy for everybody. And so I've only spoken publicly like twice. But I can't imagine standing in front of a class several times a day, let alone a year, and trying to act normal. And then also, like, I imagine it's so much more difficult than it looks like.
Yeah. And I've done lots of public speaking workshops, and I give people the same advice. Like, don't come in and try to be something else, because invariably something's going to happen. If you're giving a big keynote and then you drop all your papers, then you're going to get flustered, and then you're going to just start by being you, and that will help you navigate through things. And that notion of the wildcat comes into play. Everybody, what do they say? Even the queen farts, right? Joke about that, but it's true, right? Like, people are human beings. They're not these mythical creatures, and everybody is, Burton Cummings lives in Moose Jaw now, right? He was at one time this god, maybe he still is, of Canadian music. And I told that to somebody the other day, like, what, really? I'm like, well, he's just a person. Why can't he live in Moose Jaw? There's my Burton Cummings shout out. But oftentimes we get wrapped up in it. But public speaking is stressful. There's lots of research that shows it's the thing that people avoid the most. They don't like it. And that's often why you get to see the same people talking again and again, is because they become comfortable with it.
Yeah.
And like I say, in the workshops that I've done, it takes time, it takes work, but it's not, it's something that everybody can do.
Yeah. It's kind of similar to the fact that we were talking about discussing the minors before remembering the majors on topics too. Mm-hmm. It's with any endeavor that you pursue, there's a bunch of things that are going to take you time to get used to and figure out. And if you jump past those, you're going to stress yourself out later on. And for public speaking, or even doing this, for example, it's okay to just be rusty at the beginning. Nobody's perfect at, except for prodigies, nobody's like perfect at anything right when they start. And even now, sometimes, every now and then I'll do an episode, and it can take me like 35 minutes before I really warm up and feel like I'm doing a good job of interviewing somebody. And this still happens. Not that I'm a professional by any means, but I imagine it still happens in the classroom. I'm sure there's days where even the most tenured teachers and professors have a warm-up period where they're feeling rusty at the beginning of class,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you just have to be okay with that.
Yeah. Well, and because every day is different, and you can teach the same class the same way, in the same week. Like sometimes you have two sections, and one section will be like, that's my section of people who don't like to get up in the morning. And so this is going to be a long day. And then you have the other people who are just fired up and everything goes right. And you just think, why did this not work the same way? Because it's completely different, even though it's the same class and the same content and whatnot. And you just have to be accepting of what's happening. But I mean, you have a natural ability to engage people in conversation. You talk about, I could never get up in front of a group. This is even more public, because when you're in a classroom, it's pretty self-contained. When you put this on the internet, lots of people are going to listen to this, and lots of people are going to have the opportunity to hear you and develop an affinity for your style and what you're interested in. So that's, this is me saying, you're doing a great job. So
thank you. I appreciate it.
When you're like, I could never talk in public. Well, that's what we're doing, right? Essentially, when this hits the internet, that's what you've done. You've had an opportunity to engage with a way bigger audience.
Yeah.
So don't be nervous. Don't get all stressed out on me now.
Just start cold sweating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like to wrap it up now and click. Yeah.
Exactly. That's time. We're done.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. But at least I get to pretend that I'm just talking to you, and that's how I treat it, right? I think it's important to, at least in this setting, is that I'm not thinking about what everybody else is going to get. I'm really just thinking about the questions I want to ask you, and like as it is a conversation, very occasionally there'll be something that I want people to hear that I'll bring up, but I think that helps a lot in this setting, is that I'm just here talking to you, and then people get to kind of be flies in the wall that way.
Yeah, and it's a way of people who would not engage in conversation. Like, I think podcasts are a way of making people feel like they're a part of a conversation, even though they don't always have a voice. I mean, they have a choice in terms of selecting what they want to listen to, but they don't. They're not. There's a million people around the table right now, and so but it's helpful, and especially in a society where we don't have those same kinds of interactions, or we have way more distractions that allow us to avoid, whether we're doing it consciously or unconsciously, human contact. And it's, and I think that's why, for me personally, I listen to some podcasts, not a lot, like Dolly Parton's America, if you listen to that one.
No, I didn't know that one.
Or the one about the Scorpions ending the Cold War. That's Winds of Change. That's, I've listened to a couple and they're like, it's really good. It's like when you watch a TV series that everybody says is great, and then you finally get around to watching it, and you're like, I should have watched that before. But for me, I talk to people all the time, all day. So I'm often choosing podcasts that are informative as opposed to conversational.
Right. Yeah,
because that's a gap that for me, I find that it fills.
Yeah. Well, that's the great thing about them, is that it's weird to say like podcasts, because it's such a broad category, because you got everything from people ranting literally just ranting at a camera for an hour and a half, to like several people, large group discussions on a very specific topic. So you can find whatever you want. Oh, there was something I was going to ask, but it's leaving me now.
But it doesn't involve other people necessarily.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like you could go out and you can choose from like a million, like you say, different podcasts, and some are really interesting. And what was the one I listened to? Economics of Everyday Things. So I learned all about porta potties as I was driving home from Prince Albert the other day. It was just the portable sanitation industry. So those kinds of things, like 20 minutes on a topic that I know nothing about, tow truck companies or sushi or things like that, which is kind of interesting. But
it is interesting, and they're an amazing teaching tool that way too, because it I think that's I think YouTube and just long form video content on the internet in general is largely responsible for this. Is that, like, I remember when vlogging was starting to get popular, and like vlogging and unboxing videos.
Oh, yes.
And it was kind of this thing where people were like, why would you want to watch somebody just like go through their day? And then the other one was, why do you want to watch people open products? Like, what's the like? And then now those are like two of the biggest content streams on the internet. And I think what it opened up is this idea that people are just interested in other people's lives and the stuff that they're interested in. I'm like, if I enjoy the satisfaction of opening products, why wouldn't I enjoy watching somebody else do it? Or somebody's got an interesting life and they think other people might think it's interesting, they can post it. And then that had opened up this idea that there's an appetite for long videos about whatever. And now people will post videos on porta potties, and then you can watch a video on that and just get like this unbelievable level of demonstration and instruction on a topic that you would just never pursue otherwise. And I think it's really, really cool, because then you can take things like education so much further. It helps so much, I think, for just people's learning and people's interest and appetite, and people get to get a larger understanding for the fact that they might, as an individual, somebody listening to a video might learn that, like, oh, maybe I'm more of a multifaceted person than I thought, because they'll listen to something and think this is way more interesting than I thought it was, and maybe they'll end up pursuing that.
Yeah.
Right? So,
or I could make a way better video than this.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
and then they do their own, or they've searched through all those, and it's amazing how much of our learning happens through YouTube. And it's remarkable. But then you find a gap and you're like, well, I didn't think that anything that I do is of value, but there's a small segment of the world out there that's interested in, gardening in Saskatchewan. So I'm going to talk about my gardening or whatever. And that's a way of, becoming part of a community, feeling good about what you're learning, sharing it with other people. And it's like I'm restoring a classic car right now, and so I'm always looking for videos. People will pop up something about, hey, this is how you would weld the inner fenders or build the parts to go in there, and it's specific to like the time frame that I'm looking at, and it's really helpful. And I might not be at that stage yet, but I'll bookmark that, I'll go back to it later, or if I am working on something, I'll watch it again and again and again.
Yeah.
And so it allows me to customize my education using a very rich form of delivery of content, which is what video does. I think that's why I've always been interested in it. But it is, you can find many different examples that will address the one thing you want to do. And maybe you have a minute, right? Okay, so I need to know how to do this in a minute. So I would cross-country skiing last week. I'm like, okay, I have a question about this. I need a beginner video on my technique to see if I'm doing this right.
Right.
And I don't want the 17-minute one that has all the ads in it, that's sponsored.
Yeah.
I want somebody who is out of the goodness of their heart just said, okay, make sure you're alternating your arms and your legs and you're kicking and you're, I'm like, okay, that helped. But, that 1 minute was all I had time for that particular day. And it certainly did what I needed it to. Will I go back and revisit that topic? Maybe.
Yeah.
I have an interesting podcast story. So I did the first ever streamed video with one of my colleagues, and the other first that I did was I did the first ever podcast at USask. So I was teaching a summer class.
Sorry, the first ever stream. You did the first ever stream out of any stream ever, or the first one that USask?
At USask.
Oh, okay.
Yes. No,
Okay.
not in the world. So didn't have that technology, but I did the first ever podcast. I was teaching a summer class. It was a technology class, and I had some students who were going to be away. And I also wanted them to be able to get exposure to the content, like if they were in the gym, like the whole idea of how can we use technology to support learning, because that was kind of the area that I was working in.
Right.
And so I had 3 hours a day, and I set up my iPod, like my big, huge first gen wheelie iPod or whatever, and put a mic into it and everything like that. And I think I had a wireless mic, like a lav or something like that. And I walked around the classroom and I lectured and did stuff. And of course, students would ask questions and you wouldn't be able to hear it and whatnot. And there'd be a lot of me just droning on. And then I uploaded it into Pause, which was what we use at USask for the student portal. And into, I think it was WebCT at the time. So prior to Blackboard, prior to Canvas, all that stuff, WebCT. Yeah. It was the first online tool invented for delivering coursework. It was actually a grad student at University of Victoria that did it, and then it became bought up and then became Blackboard, and everything. The rest is history. But I remember loading that up, and because the file sizes were so great, I crashed the entire Pause system for the university.
That's awesome.
Because I had these long 3 hour, or I'd break it up and there'd be an hour and a half of, like, I guess people were supposed to be on the treadmill for an hour and a half at a time or whatever in my mind, and totally crashed the system, and it didn't work because these massive files, I think they were even MP3 files, but they were just massive.
Just so big. Yeah.
No, they probably would have been like WAV files or something like that anyway, or AIFF. But yeah, that was the first big realization that, to me, like, okay, it had to be a little more bite size, it had to be a little more organized, and the university didn't have the capacity to do that, so I got in trouble with the IT department and for crashing the whole Pause. But now that's just what we do, right? And there's traditional wisdom that says a 6-minute video, that's about the ultimate attention span and content load for an educational video. So that's
interesting.
Something that I would tell my students when they were making them, or when I would be creating my own. But there were still times where we put a big chunk, and then you could scrub and then find your spot, and then so it's giving the student the flexibility to review the parts that they don't understand. Anyway, that's an aside. When you were talking about putting long chunks of content on, my first example with doing long chunks was a classic total failure, and then I had to work around it. But it's not good.
No, it can once you get into, not even necessarily file size, but just even the length of content, when it's that long, can cause you so many issues. And like, you've probably had experiences this way, but I did a YouTube channel for a little bit. I tried my hand at like, I guess it should be content creation, but like Photoshop. So I'd spend like an hour or 2 hours just making something on Photoshop, like whatever. And not even teaching it, just like going through trying to make something weird. I would record it and I would edit it and post it on YouTube. And I didn't know anything about, I was using Premiere. I didn't know anything about Premiere. I didn't know anything about file types, sizes, how I should be doing it. I was kind of just learning it as I was going. And I would spend like 12 hours trying to get these videos the way I wanted them, and then I would go to export them, and it would take 4, and then I like 95% it would crash, and so I just like, and then you have to do it all over again, right? And so it's interesting just trying to go through that experience, figuring out what works, how can I make this better, how can I save myself time and keep it enjoyable. But so I've never crashed a full server system, but I understand the frustration a little bit.
Yeah. Well, and if you were to teach a content creation course, then what that means is you understand what is capable, or what the capacities of the technology are. And so you would never ask your students to do like massive videos, or your learners to do massive videos. You'd say, okay, these are some of the considerations that you have to have. And I would often do that because I was, again, privileged to have really good gear at the university and access to funds to buy gear. But if my students were going into a small community and all they had were, iPads, for example, well, then let's show you how you would do this with an iPad or a phone. Or, if you didn't have a license for Creative Suite, then what would you be using to do your, learn to use GIMP, or you learn to use Audacity, which is
Yeah.
still the best free audio.
That's what
editing
we're recording on
Is
right
it
now.
really?
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I'm glad that they have resisted all their efforts to be taken over, because I've been using Audacity
Yeah.
for over 20 years. I think
It's
it's a
great.
fantastic tool, and open source and free, and does everything you need. So rather than, we have Pro Tools we're going to show you, but no one's ever going to do that once we leave the university. So let's show you something that you were able to work with.
Mm-hmm.
There was a tool we used to use called Flip Cams,
Okay.
and they were like a little recorder, and they had a USB connector, and you could record a whole bunch of stuff. It was great. You even had a zoom on it, and then you just plugged the whole camera right in through the USB port and downloaded everything, and then they had a little rough editor. It was the best ever. It was small, durable. They cost like $99, and you put AA batteries in, and you could give them to students, and it was the best thing ever. And then the software kind of stopped working or what. But those kinds of tools, I think, are important to get in the hands of people, because then they're not so hung up on the 12 hours of encoding and then crashing. They can just do something really quick and learn from it, fail, succeed, move on to the next thing. And we have to create, environments that allow people to have those quick, impactful experiences, and then they can continue to build on it and grow, as opposed to, spending lots of time or having to have, $15,000 as a minimum if you want to do video production. Because you need a Mac Pro, and you need this, and you need that, and you need all these, Sennheiser mics and lights, and I don't know. I don't even know what they use anymore. I have like digital cameras, but I also used to use like Canons, like Rebels and stuff like that, or D, whatever the number is now. So
Yeah, I think this stuff's all super popular still. I had I was thinking about it, but it's become easier and easier, because I was thinking about getting a different camera. I thought my phone works fine.
Yeah.
It's just, and even if you really wanted to, it could just be my phone in the middle of the table. The sound quality wouldn't be as good, and we wouldn't have video, but it's doable. You can do everything you need just from one device.
Oh yeah, and I've done that lots. Just like it's all there, like it's a complete studio.
Yeah,
And the quality is going to be great.
Yeah, and it makes it easier to access, of course, too, because then the barrier to entry is so much smaller. Because a cell phone, like if you want a modern cell phone, it's still an expensive device, but it's not $20,000, $15,000 worth of equipment, right? And at one point in time, like if you wanted to do a radio show or a podcast or anything you were hosting on your own, there was a lot of equipment you needed to have. Otherwise, it just wouldn't work. Everything was necessary. Whereas I was thinking about that. Not from a content production standpoint, but I was going to bed the other night, and I was setting an alarm on my phone, and I forgot about, for whatever reason, I had this thought in that moment of all of this stuff in my room that is no longer there because it's just in my phone, like an alarm clock. I don't need a voice recorder for stuff like this, or a camera, or like a notepad for notes. Like there's just so many things they're still around, but you don't need them because of the cell phone.
Yeah.
It's
Your wallet.
amazing. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Although I still haven't cut ties with my wallet yet, but you can. There's everything. If you're running out of your house and it's on fire, what's the one thing you're gonna take, or the first thing you're gonna grab is your phone? Right?
Yeah, everybody.
Not like your photo albums or all those other things that people use. Like it's all on there anyway, so I'm not gonna have to worry about it.
Wow. Yeah, so we've been talking a lot about actual content production, and when I was looking through your page on the USask website, it looked like a lot of your teaching has been that, like educational design, correct me if I'm wrong, and specifically like online content and video content, like we've been talking about. Was that pretty early on that you decided that you wanted to be doing that, because you had this this production stuff that you were doing with the Saskatoon Teachers Federation that you mentioned? And so, yeah, I guess from the beginning, did you kind of know that was kind of the direction you wanted to go with teaching, or?
Yeah. I mean, I at the time would have been happy to have any kind of teaching job, because there were tons of jobs out there, at least in the elementary world. So when I got hired back at the university, I had previously worked as an undergrad in a lab that we had that taught photography, taught video production, like old school photography, where we had a dark room and everything like that. So we used to instruct people in that, and have to show them some really basic editing tools that we had, and those kinds of things. Like nothing digital, everything was 2 decks, getting up to speed, recording on a third deck, and
Wow.
having servos sync and all those kinds of things. The super suite, as it was called. So that was, that was just something that I was interested in. But as I continued to move along in my educational career, I was more interested in the design part of it and less so on the technology, because the technology would always change, but a camera was still used to capture images, and audio was used to capture audio. But it was so much more enjoyable to have, when you knew the tech part, to just concentrate on the creative part. And so I could do the tech part, I used to teach Dreamweaver for building web pages, which I love, which I still think is a great tool. But people could then do things with them. So not just learning the technology for the sake of learning the technology. What's the end game? What's the point of what you're trying to do?
Right.
So I've always been kind of drawn to the tech just because of my earlier experiences. But as time went by, is how do we design something so that it is effective and gets your message across or allows people to learn? And sometimes it means not using technology. People are like, what? Aren't you the tech guy? And I'm like, well, no. Like sometimes it's not. It doesn't solve everything, right? And if when you have a hammer, everything is a nail, right? Like that term. And so sometimes you just have to put your hammer down and then look at things from a different perspective. I still like the toys and gadgets and everything like that, but there's less and less of that in my life now. And but at the time, a lot of the classes I was teaching had that as the central focus. Like, what do we plug in, or what needs power, and then what do we do with it? It's also been, there's been a significant shift in the way that schools have a lot more access to different technologies, instead of just like you could only do video if you went to media school in Saskatoon, for example,
right.
And you'd have to go to Evan Hardy and learn all that. When that got started, I think that showed you that it was possible to scale that. And then students who were going through our teacher ed program, a lot of them, like I said, the shop teachers, would set up similar kind of smaller communications media classes in the schools, and then they could teach those same skills to students. So there was there were fewer students coming in that didn't know anything about it. So
right.
Graduating from high school, and they'd be like, hey, I took a comm media class and I really liked it, and now I want to learn how to teach it because I made lots of videos when I was a kid and I want to continue to do that. And we've had people that have come through the College of Ed that had taken those classes, and they now work in the media industry, and they have their own production companies. And at one point in time, you had to go away to do that, or wasn't available on the same scale. So I'm still doing stuff with technology, but not to the same level as I was before. A lot more right now is focused on online course design, course building, assessments, different tools that are available.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense, as these things become more ubiquitous, it's not a requirement to teach it as much, right? Like, 'cause you don't expect to have to teach your students how to read when they get there, because everybody knows how to read by that point. And nowadays,
most of them do.
Most of them do.
Maybe they can read, they just don't like to read anymore, right? They'd rather watch a video. So that's the changing nature of students. But you're right.
Fair enough,
Some of those basic skills. Like, I used to teach a class where I taught people how to use Microsoft Word.
Wow, yeah.
And Excel and PowerPoint. Like, that was, when I got into the game, that was something that people were still not, and we don't teach those classes anymore. I guess students have exposure to that in what they're doing, but a lot of times what they want to do is Prezi or Canva or PowerPoint.
Right.
They don't want to necessarily use those tools to do the boring stuff. They want them to be creative and interactive and dynamic.
Yeah, when there's so many options available. And speaking of new options, there's like so much AI now, especially in it's weird because it's been coming out for so long, but it seems like in the last even 18 months, it's just been like this unbelievable multiple fold increase in all these different tools. But do you notice that with students asking questions or wanting to use AI technologies, or are you incorporating it at all, or?
Well, at the university level, we're still trying to figure out how best to use AI. And so we, as usual, we're doing a lot of studying. We have people devoted to it. There's task force. I was lucky to work on one of the task force that was looking at using AI in instruction. We had one in research and one just kind of in generally looking at the impact of it. And because it's changed so rapidly, it's one of those things that obviously, like last summer, that's all anybody could talk about, right? It seems to have calmed down a bit.
Yeah.
I mean, politics of the world have given us new things to talk about. But it's still out there, and it's still, some people see it as a threat. Some people see it as an opportunity. I've never been threatened by technology. I've been threatened by, the use of it, improper use of it. There's a lot of concern about who owns what. And if you're using Chat-GPT, it's like Google, right? You load something up, and then whatever you load up belongs to wherever that server is. So we're trying to find ways that can use technology. There are different ways where what you upload into AI doesn't become embedded in the large language models and in the cloud and whatnot. You actually it goes away. So that's some of the things that we're trying to use on university campuses. We're trying to get people to understand what it does. My greatest fear is that people are lazy. I'll pause for effect. And we used to teach the hard stuff, and people are like, okay, I got to learn the hard stuff so that I can get to the easy stuff. And we've, through technology, made a lot of learning easy. Like being able to sit down and passively watch YouTube. Like Marshall McLuhan would be, what is going on? I told you so. I told you this is all going to happen. So when it's easy, we don't benefit from it. We don't change. We don't learn. Only Jay's opinion. And so what AI does is allows people to feed in a question from a teacher, and it spits something out at the end. And if we know our students and we have a relationship with them, they'll either feel super guilty for doing that or you'll know it's not them. But we don't always have the opportunity to be that connected to our students anymore. So there's this fear that people are not really learning or thinking because AI has the ability to replace the, for the most part, the human element of it, replace the hard stuff. And that scares me because I enjoy being challenged. I enjoy trying to write a reference letter, which I was doing this week, and struggled with it and spent lots of time with it. And then when I sent it away, I'm like, I feel good about the time and the effort and the energy, and I said what I had to say because it was meaningful to me. And if we introduce a tool that allows learners or anyone to skirt that process, then they miss out on that feeling of satisfaction. They miss out on that opportunity for growth, and then they just assume that that's the way life is, and it gets kind of easy. So I see that as kind of like, that's the part that scares me. The good part is, how do we make things more efficient, so that if I need something formatted, for example, and rather than me spending an hour making sure that I'm following APA 7 because 7 is out because 6 wasn't quite good enough. I don't know why. I never understood that. I liked 4, but now we're up to 7, where I can feed a reference list in and say, please format this for APA 7, and it does it. And then I still look at it to make sure it's okay. But that saves me 2 hours of hitting a space bar and putting in periods and things. And most of the time, I'm pretty accurate beforehand, but it just gives me that peace of mind that I haven't missed anything. So those kinds of things are good. And using the software that we have available on campus means that none of my work goes into the cloud. It just spits it all out afterwards. So I don't have to worry about that. Is that me being lazy? Not really, because I understand the process and I understand why. But what it allows me to do is then get back to writing the part that I really want to write on my next paper as I submit that one for publication. And so those kinds of things, or a way of brainstorming to get started, but not taking the creative process away from me, but maybe helping me with writer's block, those kinds of things. And again, not uploading any of my information for the whole world, but just using it as an organizational tool, and making things more efficient. But because I've been through all the hard stuff, I know what it's like and I know the value in it. But if we're just telling people, my machine is going to print something out and then you put it in your machine and then you give it back to me and then my machine will mark it, like, there's nothing there, right? Yeah. Again, all my opinion, it's all evolving, but that's something that I think AI can help us. we were talking about, listening to podcasts and music, like they don't just pop up for no reason. If you use Apple Music, here's the station made for you. Here's your favorites. Here's whatever. That's all of those things are algorithms. Grammarly is AI. Like, what? Yeah, you've been using AI for a long time. Spell check, grammar check. Those are all elementary versions of AI. So it's a part of our lives, but it's something that we, as it became ramped up on steroids with ChatGPT 3.5 when we got it, so the masses could use it, then all of a sudden it's capable of being more overtly a part of your day, and we have no training on it. The same way we were like, we give babies iPads and iPhones. Like, why would you ever do that to your child? As a parent, that drives me crazy. Again, Jay's opinion. Kids' brains don't work that way. They need to be able to sense other things in their environment before you give them the most stimulating product that we have ever invented as person kind. Because you don't want to be bothered by your children. If you don't want to be bothered by your children, don't have children, right? Spend some time with your kids. Don't go for a walk and be on your phone while you push your kid around, right? Bend down and say, hey, look, that's a blue jay. That's what's making that horrible squawking noise. Or look at that dog over there. Or do you know that they make wine out of dandelion? Like, those are the things that we should be concentrating on in terms of starting educating people and training them to look at the world differently, not giving them a device or not giving them artificial intelligence to suddenly default their thinking and their control to.
Yeah.
There's the child developmental psychologist part of me there. That's my little rant on AI and technology.
Well, that makes perfect sense, especially on the child standpoint. And as you were thinking too, like, it was making me think of an example that I ran into recently with my fiance. She was doing she's studying to become a recreational therapist, and she had to, I think, just make like not a lesson plan, but like a plan for a session she was going to do with a particular demographic. I can't remember the details, but she was asking me about like how to format it, what she should do with, like how she should make the document and all this stuff. And I just kind of said to her, I'm like, you can just ask AI to do it. And I wasn't suggesting that it do all of the work, but I said, as long as you know what you're putting into it, like you've designed, what outcomes you're looking for, what inputs you want, what the exercises or games or activities you're going to be doing in this project are that you're trying to outline, then just have it build you a format. Like, the people that you're eventually going to be working with are not going to care whether your chart was made by you or by the machine. And I'm not even sure if your teacher's going to care that much. They just want to know that you know what you're doing with the information. And I think it seems to me that that's the way things are going. Because then for example, if this podcast had a specific topic that I wanted to discuss with you, and I'd sent you a bunch of AI designed messages in my emails beforehand, and you sat down with me, you'd realize pretty quickly that I didn't know what I was talking about, right? It wouldn't take you very long to figure out, like, oh, he doesn't really know what he wants to talk to me about. Whereas if I had done all of those same things, but it was stuff I already knew about and actually did have passions about, and I was just using AI to send you emails so that it could save me time, we would sit down and you wouldn't have that same skepticism, because I've still, like you said, I've done the hard work about figuring out what I actually want to talk about. So I think that's kind of where you were going with it.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is that you can plan the heck out of an interview, and then, as I've probably done repeatedly, hopefully not to your chagrin, you go off in a completely different tangent, right? You have no idea really. So you have a list of questions, so like, if we've exhausted the topic, you can always go back to it, but it doesn't mean that we're going to lockstep through. And that's part of the fun of doing this is, like when you said don't prepare anything, good, because I'm not going to prepare anything. I'm just going to come and talk and we'll see what happens. And I think people feel that if they default to the machine, that everything is going to go according to plan and it's going to make sense and everything like that. But yeah, you're right. It's not the way to do it. And you still have to have some integrity. So even if so the example you gave about the plan, you still have to look at that and go, yeah, that makes sense. robot.
Yeah.
Thank you for your
Yeah.
help. Or you look at that and go, that makes no. It's put in a format that you can look at it, reflect on it, and say, my thinking is flawed. I'm going to move this part to this part. I'm going to move the end to the beginning and the beginning to the end. And click. Okay, it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But that technology enabled you to put it into an artifact so that you can reflect on it and then use your own understanding, experience, and the learning that you're developing to look at it and say, no, I think I'm going to change that around a little bit. As opposed to, hey, I just whipped this through Chat GPT and then I just handed it, I didn't even look at it, and then all of a sudden, like, the tense shifts halfway through and all kinds of things are wrong. And it's getting better, and it will continue to get better as we have more, algorithms and large language models. But it's still kind of plastic, right? You can tell when students have done that. And I've had students hand it in and even grad students, and I can tell that just based on the language, that no human being would put that together. Like a dictionary put that together. Computerized dictionary through Chat GPT put that together, and some students will include the prompts that they used, which is helpful, or the conversation with the interface, and then you see how it's developed over time and what they've done. So that's one way of them showing me that they understand the limitations of the technology, and they're not simply just putting in the question that I gave them in the syllabus or in a class or on an assignment and then just handing it in, but they're trying to refine it. And that's one of the good things about artificial intelligence is if you look at it as a conversation and you don't just take the first thing that comes out of it, then you're starting to think and go, okay, but what about this part? And then you prompt. And okay, it's a little better there, but it's still weak in this area. So that's where the thinking comes in, and people aren't defaulting to the machine. They're starting to use that machine to help them quickly go to other places and develop a thesis or a concept. And then whatever spits out at the end, they're still able to take that and make it their own. That I think is a good use of it. But it's that one and done laziness, not understanding how the technology is really usurping your ability to be a creative thinker or to bring in your own knowledge. And that's what, that should be why we're doing things, is to expand and experience new things and not just simply get the check mark for being done a particular task. Like, that's kind of pointless.
Yeah, I agree. It reminded me, as you were talking about that too, about a conversation I was having on Tuesday, and this young lady was talking about her partner making coffee, and how she was kind of joking about the fact that he likes to like hand grind his beans and boil the water and go through this whole process to make the coffee. And I just said, I think there's something to that, because like it's drug out and it seems like a bunch of nonsense, but he's getting an experience out of just doing that. Whereas if you just like make coffee the way I made coffee this morning, we just put the grounds in the water in the machine and hit the button, then you're just checking the box of making coffee. Kind of like you said, we're checking the box of get this question answered for my assignment. If you go through the whole process, especially if something you enjoy, whereas this gentleman obviously enjoyed coffee quite a bit, you can actually create a whole experience out of it and waste time doing something you like and gain. I think you do actually gain mentally, psychologically, even physiologically from experiences like that. And I do worry that, especially on the AI side, but even with all sorts of technologies that we already have, that we are making our lives so efficient that we're taking life out of them a little bit. Even things like doing the dishes. I don't have a dishwasher, and I live in the basement of this house. And in the basement, we don't have a dishwasher. It's just a sink, and I don't mind it at all. I actually quite enjoy just spending the time doing the dishes, because I feel like I'm contributing to my life, and I don't know. It might sound a little bit hippie even, but I feel like I'm giving the dishes the respect that they deserve by going through the time to clean them properly and dry them and put them away, as opposed to just using them and then throwing them in a machine and having the machine do it. I'm sure at one point in my life, like when I have kids, for example, I'll need that time for other things. So I'll be using a dishwasher. But for the time being, it's actually an enjoyable experience where I get to just exercise my physical abilities and enjoy that just for the sake of doing it. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And we do that, we do a combo. So we'll put some things in the dishwasher, but, different people will take turns. It extends that connection that is the socialization that happens around a meal. Mm-hmm. So people are putting leftovers away and they're bringing things back and somebody's wiping off the table. Somebody has to dry, right? Unless you're like, just leave it in the rack. So there's all kinds of things that come into play. But I think what you said was really brilliant in terms of that we're automating the joy out of our lives. That notion of, why can't people take the time to grind their own beans and make the, whereas we have the AI of coffee making, the Keurig or the Nespresso or whatever, and people don't even think about that. They grab a pod, they throw it in, whatever, and for some folks, like tea drinkers are famous for that, right? Like there's like stuff that happens. There's the steeping time, and there's the temperature of the water, and then there's, do you use a tea bag, or what kind of tea bag do you use, or do you use the little refillable silver thing? I don't know what that's called. So
I can't remember either.
I have one, but I don't know what it's called. And all of those things, much like learning, can really make the experience enjoyable, and then you get like a great cup of coffee or a tea at the end. And yes, today I had that much coffee and I'm just like buzzing because I never drink coffee, so it probably comes across in our interview. But the time that you take to do those tasks are, allow you to slow down. By washing the dishes, it helps your digestion, right? Because you're still active and moving, and then that helps your liver start to process what you put into it from the meal and your stomach and everything like that. Whereas if you eat, load the dishwasher and go lay down on the couch right away, that doesn't help your digestion. So there's all kinds of physiological reasons to do that as well. But it can be very satisfying to clean and be a part of that process and have the meal not just be the eating part, but the preparation, or the shopping, depending on what you're getting. Maybe you're going to a special place to get special things that you would prepare. Whereas AI, would remove all that.
Yeah.
You would take something, like the TV dinner, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The frozen dinner into the oven, onto the plate, crumple up the tinfoil, and then on your way. That's like a 60s reference, so I don't know that probably.
I was following.
It's pretty old, so.
Yeah, it's interesting because you're distilling so much out of it. Like you're distilling a bunch of time out of these things, but included in the time is some of the most enjoyable parts of it. Like for example, we had people over on the weekend for dinner, and I cooked a traditional recipe from Ghana that my grandma taught me how to make, and it takes like 3 hours to cook this dish. And I don't know that there's anywhere that you could buy it in Saskatoon, but if you could, it would ruin a lot of that experience, right? It took me so long to prep and do all of this stuff, and my friends got to enjoy this great meal that they've never had before that I love, and I got to share that with them. Whereas if I would have just went to the store and bought it, it would be a completely different experience, and so much of the good parts of it would have been distilled out of it. And so I worry that some things are going that way permanently.
Pretty hard to skip the dishes with a traditional Canadian meal, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Well, that's part, and I like that part. Like you said, it's you're talking about doing the hard stuff, and I think you have to. So with AI, do you notice that you're running into negative experiences with it with students a lot of the time, or is it mostly just kind of encouraging that they don't do it?
Well, we're still developing policies. So in your syllabus, you would say, okay, I will let you use AI and I will let you use it these ways, or I do not want you to use AI in the class. But most students are using it, even if you have it in your syllabus. I will say that because I'm not teaching this term, the last term I taught was winter term last year, and it was still something that's, people were using, but it was more evident in my grad classes than it was in my undergrad classes. So I'm hearing from other people, but I'm not really sure what's going on because it is an individual thing. And depending on how you set up your assessments, it allows you to work around that. You know, it's the same way that we promote academic integrity and try to encourage people not to plagiarize. If you set up your assessments so that they are done in steps and they're meaningful and they're personalized, then you can, you know, then it makes it so hard to use the tool and then have to kind of dial it back and add your own stuff. You might as well just do it your own way anyway. Like, you know, oh, this is great, I put it in, and then I had to change this part and I had to change that part. I'm like, well, why didn't you just spend an hour doing it yourself instead of 4 hours trying to fix a plagiarized copy of what you were doing? And so it does come down to, you know, what do the instructors want, what do they allow, how aware are they of creating good assessment, and then having an open conversation with students and say, you know, I'm not going to come around and police this. I want you to start developing some integrity, especially in a professional area, which education is. You're going to be teachers, and next year you're going to be in a classroom and you're going to be working with students. Maybe it's just your internship, but that is the single most important aspect of your education degree, and parents and kids are going to be coming to you and saying, what do I do? Or they're going to have no guidance, so it's going to be up to you to provide some wayfinding in terms of how they use AI. So let's talk about using it now. Let's try it now. Let's figure out what we're comfortable with in our own classes, and then as you move forward, you can at least do so. You know, if you're going to cheat, at least you know why you're cheating and how to cheat and the impact of it. Like, we're never going to stop people from being lazy, or the people, and it gets back to the privilege. You know, if I don't have to work because I've got food in my fridge, right, then I can take the time to do that. If I have to get home from work, pick up my kids, and then go work all night, then there's a chance that I might look for a way to make that a little bit easier on myself, and that pressure causes people to do things that they wouldn't normally do, and artificial intelligence, again, is another easy way of or at least it seems like the easy way of solving some of those dilemmas. So if we are setting up things both inside our classroom and making positive changes to society, then folks can take the time to do it. But if not, then they would, attack things in a way that maybe is not what we'd hoped for.
Yeah. I guess it's like anything else, right? You can't ignore it and then assume that you're going to be able to deal with it once it's a bigger problem than it is now.
Yeah. But it's, I wish I had a better answer for you, but it's evolving, and universities right across Canada are trying to determine what is the best manner to work with it, and same with our K-12 sector, pre-K-12 sector. When we're always looking at, when's the best time to introduce things to students, and the sooner we start to develop things like citizenship and academic integrity and respect, those kinds of core values to our students, not indoctrinating them, but making them aware of why that's important down the line, then I think that they have the ability to handle the nebulous stuff that comes into their lives a little bit better. Maturity has a lot to do with that, but awareness early on is if you teach a kid to take ownership of their learning soon enough, then they will take ownership of their learning. And if we don't give them that opportunity, then at some point in time, like then they come into grade 9 and they're still like grade 9s, they just walk around like molecules and bump into each other, right? Or atoms, and they're like, I don't know what to do, I don't know, right? And then all of a sudden in grade 10 you're expected to be like a scholar and referencing your work and having final exams and all of these things. And maybe if we started with some of those things sooner, then students would be able to do that before they're like it's thrust upon them in those last 3 years of their official formal education.
Yeah, you can't just jar people into anything. It doesn't really work in any areas of life.
And that's not meant to disrespect grade 9s, but they're a very unique group of people. We've seen them all, and we're still trying to find ways to help them transition into, at least in Saskatchewan schools or Saskatoon schools, into being a little bit better at what they do, through no fault of their own. Lots of changes going on at that age.
Yeah, it's a weird transitory period in your life, especially grade 9 in Saskatchewan, because you go from being in like when you're in grade 8, you're in the school with like a bunch of like really young kids compared to you, and then all of a sudden everybody looks like adults. And you're trying to figure it out, and so yeah, and everybody goes through it here at least, but it's good that it's something that's always being worked on too, because like these conversations about AI classes, everything else, it's life continues to change for everybody, and you got to figure out how to be on the train and not left behind, and figuring out how to continue to be adaptable. So I did this is a bit of a segue again, but when I was going through your education, I noticed that you had done your PhD in southern Queensland. Is that where is it? That's in Australia?
Yes.
Correct. How'd you go from Saskatchewan for everything else to Australia and then back again?
Well, I didn't actually spend any time in Australia.
Okay.
So what I was looking for, because at the time I just finished my master's degree, and I guess I said that I didn't do any career planning, but I guess I had hoped that someday I would end up in a positive situation where I'll have like 2 more sips. Let's put me over the edge here with coffee. And so I was looking for a program, thank you,
Of course.
that would allow me to get that terminal degree, although I've done a degree since, so it's not technically a terminal degree, but to get to the doctoral level of study. And I had been designing, so I was the instructional designer for the college and the technology kind of lead, and I'd been designing courses. So I talked about, WebCT and all these other innovative things that we had done, but I'd never taken an online course. I had built a million of them and subjected all those poor students to I guess that works, or I learned this at a conference or a workshop, so let's try it. So I thought, well, why not do an online degree that would allow me to, get that next credential that I didn't have, and then I would learn about course design at the same time. And so I was looking around, and that's before there were like many choices to do online doctoral programs, like hardly any. This particular university, Southern Queensland, in a city called Toowoomba, the Garden City, just in from Brisbane. So if you're ever visiting Australia, actually my son is in Brisbane right now.
Wow, that's cool.
Yes.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So I told him to take the bus to Toowoomba. He probably will not do that. But
at least somebody can go vicariously.
It's kind of like going to Kelowna. It's like, it's pretty, but there's a lot of, retired people there.
Yeah.
And so took the class. It was kind of like a hybrid correspondence. We didn't have the a lot of the internet stuff wasn't set up, so we did lots of telephone things, and it was a weird time difference. The other good thing was that the Canadian dollar was better than the Australian dollar, so I had more purchasing power, which was good for my tuition. And this university was the International Online University of the Year the previous year, so it had a fairly high profile in terms of its ability to deliver distance programs and those kinds of things. So I signed up, and the first ever class I was at Emma Lake in a friend's cabin on my phone overlooking the lake or whatnot, had all my stuff spread. I still have a picture of it somewhere, and that's how I began my Australian university career.
Your Australian PhD.
Wow. And then halfway through, my phone battery died, like it was like a flip phone or something like that, my little Nokia. So I had to run to my vehicle and plug the charger in, and so I could still stay involved in the class. But it was a really good opportunity. It was a chance to see how important it is to have a point of contact at a university, and how some things worked in terms of interaction. We didn't really have much more than discussion boards, and it was really rudimentary. Like I said, a lot of it was based on teleconferencing. And but I did go there, so I did visit. I got a student card. That was like, as soon as I got there, I'm like, I gotta get a student card, because this is the whole reason I'm coming. So I do have my Australian student card. It's no longer valid. And met my supervisor face to face and everything, and it was just a really quick down and back kind of thing. So it was not because my family was here and my kids were still young, so I would do most of my schoolwork at night. And so I had, again, developed a lot of understanding and empathy for the students that I would work with later in their online graduate program, because it's really difficult to have a full life and then to add this layer of high level graduate learning on top of it.
Yeah, I can't imagine, especially for the first time and doing it on the phone. That would be intense. I noticed too that like this might not make sense at the beginning, but I promise it'll tie
I'm
in.
with you. Yeah.
But I noticed in some situations where you talked about like doing these courses and learning about how to build online courses and then making them, but not having done one yet. I notice like sometimes, for example, if I'm gonna have people over, I will clean my house or my area, and everything will look fine. And then the minute somebody walks in the door, every single thing that's out of place or that's dirty, it just immediately stands out, and you can't see it until somebody else is looking at it with you. Or an assignment, you'll actually an email. You write an email and you'll proofread it if it's a long one, and you'll send it. And as soon as you hit send, all of your typos that you missed stand out. And it's just this weird experience that happens that you can check a lot of times on something, but until you're at that final step, you don't notice it. Did you kind of notice that when you were going into this course at this university on like doing this distance learning? When you started, did you kind of pick out a bunch of things that, oh, maybe I've designed this for students or taught them to do this and the courses that they're designing, and now that I'm doing it, it's like, oh, this doesn't work very well at all.
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. So that was another level of understanding and awareness that I didn't have before. And again, as I said, that's one of the reasons why I took an online degree, because this was, where the university was headed and where I was, trying to help people do a better job. And if we weren't really getting to what we were trying to do in terms of making it a better learning experience for students, then we were kind of failing in some ways. I will say that on my master's thesis on page 3, there's a typo. So you write this thing forever and then you bind it, and that's when it was a book, know? And so I have copies of the book, and you flip it open and like page 3, and it's like, oh, how nice. Right? So it doesn't matter. Like, that's just going to happen in life, and you have to go with it. But yeah, you change when you change your perspective, or it's a different context. It's not just people. It's not just my friends coming over. Maybe it's somebody I haven't met before, so I better do this. Whereas if your friends were coming over, you may not clean the same way or put things in the same order or whatever, and you'd be like, yeah, whatever. But suddenly, when the context changes or the stakes rise or fall, then you see things differently. And it never fails. And I tell that typo story all the time. So you just have to do the best you can, and it's not going to be perfect. And if you're trying to look for perfection in anything you're doing, then you're gonna miss out. Just like the Wildcat video, just like what we're doing here. If you were to go through and edit this, it would never be perfect.
Yeah.
Like, what would you do to make it perfect? What is perfection? Like, how do you define that? What would you eliminate? If you suddenly said, all of my podcasts are going to be 40 minutes long, how would you decide what to cut out from our interview today? That would be, doing your listeners a disservice, because this is the intent of what you're trying to do with this podcast, is to introduce people to genuine ideas, not mediated or in any way repackaged. Just record, stop, upload. How many hits am I going to get, right? Exactly. How many people are going to download this? So it's so having gone through that experience helped me. But every time you do something, it helps you. Every time you interview someone, you're going to get better. You're going to think of things differently. You're not going to stress about something that maybe the first 5 times you did an interview, you're like, what are my levels at? Can I go in and fix that later? I don't know what's going to happen. Is my phone battery going to die? Okay, no, I'm going to plug it in because it died the first time I did it, and then I didn't have video. So all of those things are learning over time, and the mistakes sometimes are ones that we want to correct for quality purposes or for efficiency purposes, and then sometimes they're just things that we go like, it's a typo, and that's just the way it goes. I read a lot of sports stories, and I see that some of those typos have become part of our language and just part of the way that we express ourselves. And the team is going to gel, and sometimes they spell gel J-E-L, sometimes they do G-E-L. Sometimes, like, I noticed that in sports writers, and I'm like, well, I guess as a society we have accepted that as a convention now, and we don't go through and proofread it the same way we used to. But some of that stuff drives me a little bit crazy. But
Yeah. Some of it is, yeah, I find one that drives me crazy actually is bad grammar and memes. When people post memes on the internet, even though it's a meme, like it's just a silly joke. I'm like, this technically doesn't make sense because you wrote it wrong. It drives me nuts. Yeah. But then I'm also like, but I know what you're saying, so like maybe I can't get mad at it.
Have you ever read the book Eats, Shoots, and Leaves?
No.
Okay, it's a fantastic book.
Shoots, and Leaves?
Eats, Shoots, and Leaves.
Okay.
It's a punchline for a joke about a panda. And it's all about grammar and punctuation, and it's a fabulous book. And if that's something that drives you crazy, then you should read that book.
Yeah,
it's little, it's thin, it's cute, but it just talks about how those kinds of conventions that used to be really important have kind of dissipated, and how they impact the way that we understand things. And nowadays people just read through and they make sense of it on their own. They, punctuation is I'm going to get us both in trouble, is becoming less and less recognized and maybe less and less important to people.
Yeah.
Which I don't agree with, but I'm seeing that more and more in people's writing and in public writing and in newspapers and in on websites, because websites, it's so easy to get something out there or memes, and there's not an editor. People don't go through and fact check or grammar check or spell check even a lot of times. So the content that we're being exposed to is it's raw. It's what people are doing.
Yeah. It is. It's really interesting to see. I write a little bit, and I notice that too, because when I'll be writing something and then going to post it, I'll be thinking about that sometimes, because I'll put punctuation in specific spots, or I'll put certain things in, like if I'm quoting something and I need to use brackets somewhere, or if I'm writing from my own language and I need to put something in parentheses in one spot. A lot of the times, just those structural changes or those grammatical changes, I'll be putting them in and then like honestly thinking about, is anybody really going to notice or care? I still do it because it matters to me, but I don't see it in anything else anymore. So, because to me, I know when I'm making those changes that this change here actually changes the meaning of this sentence, but people reading it might not know that. And then, so what effect does it serve?
I always use punctuation in emails. Like I'll put in commas and phrases and stuff like that. I'm like, is anybody even gonna, like, this is it's disposable communication, but it's so important for me to have, to just stick to my guns in that regard. And I know why it's there, and it matters to me, and the other people reading it might not notice, but if it's, like I need a comma there. Jay, it's an email. I know, but I just need to I have this inner dialogue with myself, and because a lot of the writing I do is, formal writing, and it is peer reviewed and published and stuff, I think I hold myself to that. Like if I start slipping in some areas, and I'm going to make a mistake in the others, so I just try to be as consistent as possible, and then I don't have that variation but it also means that maybe my writing comes across in an email a little too formally. This guy has commas in his email. What kind of freak is he? Like, what's going on?
Well, it's funny because there's people like that, right? Like people that would have that reaction.
Yeah.
I personally don't, but it is interesting. Even in text sometimes, like sometimes I'll write, especially if it's not somebody I tend to be, I guess not everybody tends to do this to some level, but even if I'm texting somebody I've never texted before, I start very formal, like an email, and then based on the responses, I kind of cater to that. But I'll do like to the point where I'm like doing like an introduction with a comma, and then like signing the message at the bottom. And I'm sure some people get that and they're like, this is odd, why is he talking to me like this? But you just don't know. And I think that's actually one of the purposes that formal communication serves, is that you can start off at a point where you know that there's kind of rules about it, and then if you follow them, you put yourself in like a safe spot, and then you can open yourself up to informalities from that point on.
Yeah, because you can't go back, right?
Yeah.
Like once that wall is down.
Yeah, exactly.
Jay, what's up? And it's like, thank you, Dr. Wilson, for getting back to me. What happened? Like, that's weird. Like, weren't we? Yeah. So it's.
So you said that it sounded like you were saying that you thought your doctorate would be your terminal degree, and it didn't end up being. And you've done a master's of business administration since then. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So that's kind of a little bit of another switch there. So why an MBA?
It's just always something that has been on my radar. I was always interested in it. I did work briefly in the financial services industry with an investor in town here. I thought that might be a career that I pursued. So that was like in the summer. I had a summer job. I used to work as a historical interpreter for the provincial government at Fort Carlton, which was connected to my history degree, which I found was really interesting. And then on my days off, I would go downtown and put on a suit and work in an office and, check mutual fund prices all day and stuff like that. So I've always been interested in finance and money and just because it's interesting. And so that was one of the reasons. The other one is an MBA is a very broad grounding in a lot of areas. And if you are in leadership, a lot of times you get there because you're foolish enough to say yes, for starters. And you may have a little bit of capacity in terms of leadership or organizational skills, but you don't have any really firm theoretical grounding in what you're doing. A lot of it is the tummy test, right? Like, oh, why did I do that? Or, oh, that feels good. That's a lot of times that's how we make our final decisions. What does our tummy tell us? And I was finding that in some of the positions I was in, the tummy test wasn't quite enough. I needed a little bit more understanding of why I was doing things, even things that were working. So I thought, yeah, let's do an MBA. And so signed up, and the Edwards School of Business has a fantastic program here, shameless plug, and allows you to do it, in a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year approach, I think. At least it did when I went through it. And then they had combinations. So we had people who were doing pharmacy and law and other professions at the same time. So they would come out with a business background as well as that designation and professional discipline.
That's really good. Yeah.
Which I think is important. Like if you're a pharmacist or a lawyer, you want to run your own company, firm, what have you, you can do that. One guy was an optometrist that was in there. And so it was a chance to be exposed to different schools of thinking in terms of organizational strategies and finance. I took 3 accounting classes and survived them. That was, I'm not afraid of numbers, but things get pretty complex. And, your brain is, there's neuroplasticity lasts through your whole life. But as you, move into your 50s, the plastic is a little bit harder to get going. So I struggled with some stuff, but I got through and learned a lot, and I'm still interested in money and accounting and investing and all those things, but it gave me an understanding of budgeting and capital value and assets and all those things. And it was really it was a great experience, and I met so many interesting people, different backgrounds, people I would never have been exposed to, and so it changed my thinking. I went through a college where I knew a lot of the people, and but had never been taught by them. So it was really neat to be in classes to see how another college delivered their programming. And I'll say they were just such a fantastic group of educators and really exemplary in their commitment to designing and delivering. We had COVID show up in my first year, so that was interesting to see how people were transitioning. And because I taught online for 20 years before COVID came, I could see what they were doing and some of the really effective ways that they as a college transitioned all of their programming to online, and creating videos and having interaction. So it was another kind of online experience. And just showed me that some of the things that I was doing intentionally and naturally actually had some theoretical basis to them, like some of the strategies that I had used that I had picked up from mentors or observation or just figured out on my own. And it was really, really a good opportunity. And I'm still in contact with people that I was in class with, and some of them have companies that I buy their products now and those kinds of things as well, and others have gone on to great things in other careers. So it was great. I would work all day, and then I would go across the street. I'd go from College of Ed to Edwards, and then join in as a student. And
that's cool.
It was just really,
It sounds like a cool experience.
Yeah. And I mean, it was tough, and but I enjoyed it, and I learned a lot. It was really good.
And so it sounds like those MBAs are a little bit like they're more of, I don't know if this is actual terminology, but like more of a practical master's degree as opposed to like there's no like a research oriented?
Yeah, there was lots of practical, this is what we do in business and industry, which I think was really helpful. There were also opportunities to explore areas creatively, lots of group projects, lots of case studies, so you were thinking differently. Like I had used some case studies in my own work, but not to the level that they do there. It's very much a signature pedagogy that they have. And I struggle with the concept of signature pedagogy. So anyone listening that knows that about me, if you're still awake, if I haven't put you all to sleep, it's interesting to see how that works. And I started using case studies more and differently in my own instruction as a result of that.
Yeah.
But it was just a really good chance to learn in a different way and just kind of build on some of the things that I'd already been doing, or to take things even further. And I think that's been really helpful for me. Highly recommend it, with all the people's spare time and money.
Yeah.
But it was worthwhile. And I think that a lot of people get into that, those types of programs because they're craving more learning in a position that they're already in or comfortable with, or they've got a career established, and this can accelerate them or move them into other areas as well.
Yeah So it sounds like a great opportunity, a great tool. And I guess we covered everything that I wanted to talk to you about basically. Is there anything else that we didn't talk about that we've put in a lot of time here? And is there anything that we haven't covered though that you wanted to talk about? Or
felt like we've been talking for 15 minutes.
Yeah,
so
that's the great part of it, right?
Not really. I just hope I didn't go too far off on any crazy tangent or anything like that. I appreciate the your willingness to listen and engage in conversation. And I'm the same way. I like to sit down and learn about people and talk about things that maybe we don't have the time to just sit and stop and talk about, but are really important to us. And again, I've been very privileged to have a platform in a classroom, at conferences, in front of other groups to share my thoughts. And this is, I think this is a wonderful opportunity to get to know you, to get to talk about things that maybe are important to other people. But I think I'm certainly happy with what we've done today. You're still smiling, so that's good.
Yeah, I've had a great time. So this has been awesome. And definitely don't feel bad about the tangents or anything. Those are my favorite parts of these conversations, is because then you get a little bit more of an eye for what you're really interested in, But no, if that's everything, I guess, where can people find you if they want to get in touch with you for any reason, or social media, or any courses that you might be teaching again in the future, anything like that, if you want to put that out there for.
Yeah. Well, I'm always happy to host people at the Prince Albert campus. So if you're in and around, come by and we can chat. I'm there 2 or 3 days a week. I'm also available here at USask, so I do a week's worth of work in 2 days here, and then a week's worth of work in 3 days in Prince Albert. And I'm still on X and Blue Sky and Facebook and all those old person socials. I do have an Instagram account, but I just use it to follow my kids, so I don't post a whole lot on there. And through the university, if anyone wants to reach out to me, it's just my name at usask.ca.
Okay.
So email is fine, and really, like I say, welcome any kind of conversations with people, or if there's anything that I got wrong, I'm happy to have a discussion around that, or if there's any way that I can provide people with a boost or further discussion, I'm always happy to engage in these kinds of conversations. I think we need more of it, and like I said at the beginning, I'm really delighted to see people like yourself take an interest in teaching and learning, not just because it might be a popular topic, but because you have a genuine interest in it and a genuine interest to access information and to talk to people about it. So I think that speaks volumes about you and why you're doing this. And I'm just really, like I say, thankful to be invited to be here today.
Well, thank you so much for being here. All right.